Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustache Tom, here to review the movie The Best of Enemies. So I saw the trailer for this play a few times and it caught my interest. This is of course based off of a true story, but this is more of a pseudo telling of the story, not so much a documentary. But they decided to dramatize certain aspects with the people in the real life having passed away. It probably made a bit more sense to tell the story through a more modern lens. So, with that being said, before I can officially begin this review, I will say that I'm going to be trying my best to go off script for this review and probably the next few reviews upcoming, because every time I pop up my review in a separate tab, it slows all the process down, causes lag, and I want to stop doing that. So I wish I had another laptop or another computer so that I could have that set up, but I don't have money for that and I don't have an official job. I wish I had some Patreon supporters, so if you do feel like supporting me, helping me get that second laptop, that is exactly what that will be set up for. Links will be in the description below. I'll make sure to edit my Patreon to make sure that people know when they're clicking to support me that that is what the money is going to be going toward. A second laptop, so that way it can stop lagging, I can have my notes here, it would be just for the best. So with that being said, let's get on into it. So we mainly focus on these two characters here, Anne and this other guy. His name, I forget what his full name is, but they end up calling him in the movie CP anyways, so I'll just call him CP for simplicity's sake. And he ends up being a clan member of, well, Ku Klux Klan. They don't at any point in the movie officially call them that, but they do show at one point in the movie the gown of the Ku Klux Klan, but that does happen later on. So we primarily focus on Anne at the beginning of the movie. She's collecting these various complaints from these people who have been struggling. So she's sort of like a semi-activist, semi-like sort of activist upon people who have tough times with their houses and like issues that have been going on, and she's bringing these complaints to forget what this guy is. He's like a fat rounder gentle guy who's sort of saying like, oh, we'll hear you out, but we need time, and then when they go to court, they essentially have one of the representatives who are like a rebuilding contract person who says that they need time because, and their flimsy excuse was like the conditions of like the weather would them, and that is sort of how they go about getting around the segregation. Of course, this movie takes place around the 1970s, which, at least in the North, I believe they even state it in the movie at one point. This was after Martin Luther King's speeches, and this is like when the North was already starting to move toward that. Like, there are already states already accomplishing that, and this was one of the southern states, and they were falling behind in that regard. So that being said, we follow the complaints. The complaints don't get met up, and then afterwards we meet Anne's daughter. I forget her character. I forget what her name was, but we follow her to school. She's learning stuff, but the building catches on fire. And this is primarily where the plot, if you were, this is pretty much where the rest of the crux of the movie takes place hold of. They demand, with the school now being torn down and with so many of their students being forced to evacuate, they needed a place to essentially host all these students. So they wanted to conglomerate them with the other students from because they were segregated to this all-white school. So there's a little bit of back and forth. CP puts forth the notion that the students are behind a year, and they would have, I guess the way that it would be set up is that there'd be like a year behind, like they were naturally being a year behind, but they were a year behind because of the already bad equipment and school supplies that they were getting, so they were already falling behind because of the segregation already happening, but that wasn't being recognized well enough. So it ended up sort of failing initially, and tensions between the two sides were already sort of like, oh, well, we kind of have our own issues trying to pick up these many students. So this movie is very interesting, and I really, really do like it. I liked that it was not as clear-sighted as just they're just inherently wrong. I mean, they are racist. The majority of the white characters end up being racist, and then, of course, in turn, forces the Anne character to play off of that racism with their own racism. It sort of bending it back and forth between the two, or whatever the response to racism being like an overwhelming amount of like, oh, they're just all bad. I don't think that would fall under racism, but a response to the assumption of what racism would cause. I mean, that's the thing about racism, at least in today's world, at least the society that I have been around, that has become more of a sort of meme word, unfortunately. Like, they use it as a meme, like, oh, they just say that thing is racist without ever explaining, what racism actually is, and it usually never really is when people say that. And of course, I'm gonna always call out what I'm referring to. I'm referring to cinema sins when I say just usually casually saying something is racist without actually explaining how that thing is actually racist. Of course, actual racism, in this case, historical racism, is provided. It is the notion that this one particular group, this white particular group, it feels like they are superior to the black group. And yes, they do use more the other language as well, on both sides. So there's that on top of that, so if there wasn't enough racism, they make it really obvious. There are a few scenes here and there throughout the movie that they're really, really short, and I think like all of those could have been cut just to save a little bit of time. They're just like scene setup things, but they don't really go anywhere, and they cut away, so they could have been cut from the movie and nothing would have been lost, honestly. Besides those little moments, I think this is a very solid movie throughout. The performances are pretty great. And of course, we all know where this is going. We're introduced to a mediator, and I forget what the term is they use. It's like a... actually... oh man, I forget what they call it. It was like... It's a word that they confuse for another word in the movie, but we meet Bill, who, after the whole school burning thing, and Bill surmises that both groups will meet together to coincide some sort of solution, hear out what each other have to say, and vote on the situation and make it an official, like, meeting sort of deal. Bill is from the north, and Anne has trouble with that, even though they are both black. because he already, their states, as I mentioned, had already gone through that sort of starting to fix that situation. Um, so the two groups meet up, black and white, all in one room, uh, and they lay out all the issues with the school, and it primarily ends up focusing on throughout that. And through it, we see that Bill forces CP and Anne to work together as sort of the cohorts between this sort of diplomatic solution that is developing. So we mainly focus on that. We see that Anne eventually helps out one of CP's children, who he has some sort of condition. I'm not sure. I don't think they actually never named that condition in the movie, so I'm not sure which one it is. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not even going to hazard a guess, because I don't know. It is a condition where where that individual rocks back and forth. They don't seem to particularly talk at all. I'm not sure if that is I don't know, again. And so she does a favor for CP's kid, and CP sees this eventually. All the meanwhile, CP's other cohorts on his side, on the clan side, they are starting to see that Bill's intention was to get four on one side and 5 on another, I believe, was the setup. And I believe the white side, I guess I'll call it, had one additional spot, if I'm not mistaken, or it could have been the other way around. I forgot which way it was, but nonetheless, it was a certain amount of people on one side and then a certain amount of people on the other side, and they would be picked at random with these two bowls, and it would be stated that they couldn't be specifically associated with any of the four groups that were being represented in this little meeting. So they picked out their names. So CP's little white conglomerate group start to go out to meet up with these other individuals, trying to convince them later on through some rather dirty tactics to force them to get into fear, into changing their perspective. One of the men that they tried to persuade, he was some sort of military vet, or military soldier, I should say, and he employed various black workers and considered them as equals. So what they did to him is that they had the cops come over to his place, inspect, quote unquote, inspect his work, and say that some sort of malfunction that was never a problem before is suddenly a problem. So very cheap tactic, got that man fired. It never shows him getting his job back, so I'm not sure what happened to that character after the fact, but in the end, that doesn't persuade him to change the vote at the end. Spoilers, I guess. But they also threatened this other woman by going to her house, getting all rapey toward her, very uncomfortably, forcing her to be fearful. So they got her vote at the end. Spoiler alert. So it eventually gets to the big votes. And the way that they set this up is that they needed 8 votes, and again, it was split between 4 and 5, whichever way it was. It was either 4 white people and 5 black people, or vice versa. So CP's conglomerate guy, the one that at the beginning of the movie that we saw, he's all we got this. But in the process, the first two like columns that they were voting on were already passed. But the main one was, of course, the getting the schools to come together. And that one also ended up passing mainly due to the vote of course, also predictably, CP, who I had mentioned had gotten that help. He was starting to see the changes and see and learn. Actually, he didn't end up learning at one point about the vote tampering process that the his little collaborators were doing. He takes out his card. He reads off what it, like it's a little Ku Klux Klan membership sort of card. Like I forget, like a part of it reads like you're supposed to treat everyone with respect. Ironically enough, but then like it flips on its head, like in its own writing, so he ends up ripping it up anyways. So he ends up voting yes, which ends up getting them the 8 votes to put the schools together into one collective. Celebrations are had, but the movie doesn't end quite yet, as CP sort of goes off on his own, back to his work as this sort of gas station person. He's now not getting any business because all of his little conglomerate buddies are no longer going to him. So, like before, Anne decides that she went ahead and told all of her people on her side to come all the way over to get gas from this man. And it shows after the movie, during the credits, the real life people sort of being interviewed, and them just talking about how crazy this whole situation was. So, I really appreciate this movie. It was really good. It was really well acted. Of course, it's really always hard to tell with these types of movies what parts are, like, historically altered in any way, shape, or form. Again, I think, like, they could have cut out, like, a few scenes, like, those few short setup scenes where nothing happens, and I think that would have just made the movie a little bit more concise. Other than that, I really didn't have any other issues with this movie. I thought it was really solid. Even with those little scenes, I don't think they really take away anything either. So I'm going to go ahead and give this movie a solid 8 out of 10. I really, really enjoyed it. And just as a little extra, I guess, as this movie, or the story, I should say, kind of reminds me of something I read about some time ago, about a black priest who was saved by Klan's members, and him talking to these Klan's members, and then through talking was able to convince them that their ideologies were flawed. Thus, they left that group, and then were able to change their outlooks on life on their own accord. And, that does, ring true to, I think back to the election we had, with Clinton versus Trump, and then all the Nazi stuff, and the punching of the Nazis, and it's like, wow, we really are stupid sometimes, I feel, when we see or hear about these types of stories where you have people who are actually in bigger, actual racial tension against each other, and they talked it out. They talked it out with bigger racial tension than the election, where people punched people and accused them of being Nazis or being Trump supporters or whatever. Like, what happened? What actually happened? How the fuck did we fuck up that bad? It kind of is remarkable to see how sometimes the past is superior in certain ways to the present, or, even in this case, the more recent past, I suppose I should say. So I kind of look at this movie and I kind of laugh, thinking to myself, wow, like, bravo to the bravery of these people who were actually in the dire straits of actual racism and actually decided to say, you know what, we're going to listen to these people. We might not see eye to eye right now, but we're going to talk it out. We're going to hash out these issues for for the future. We're actually concerned about the future. We're not going to, think about all that other stuff. We're going to let all that other stuff just go to the back. We're going to remove it from the picture, even when things got on their most uncomfortable, like when they were there for like 2 weeks at a time, and then they were like, we're kind of bored, and then the black crew was like, oh, we'll like play some gospel music, I think they said, and then the Ku Klux Klan members is like, well, we want some of our stuff here too, and then that's where, as I mentioned earlier, where that the suit of the Ku Klux Klan thing is set up. And then you have kids later on of the black variety trying to knock it over, and you see Anne coming over and saying, "You're stupid. You need to read up on this stuff. That you set up a bunch of pamphlets and to not mess with their stuff to learn about what these people are, what their mindsets are, how to get into their mind, how to understand them, what they're thinking." Again, things that, when you look at, again, more recent, or I guess past recent political scuffles, you go, wow, that is sorely missed. So I really appreciate when movies like this come out. Again, I really liked it. The acting was really solid. Again, an 8 out of 10, easily. Definitely would recommend, especially if you're someone who's into sort of looking at the past of Americans' history. Another one to add into that in a lot of movies. So, if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.